How long has it been since I've done this again? At least this one followed orders and froze all motor functions. Hello and welcome back to Dystopian Review, the place where we dream of nightmare worlds. I'm your host, Jesse Pullman, and I'm here with a reminder that there's never a bad time to think about the consequences of nuclear war and the relative smallness of a human life through the lens of one of science fiction's most legendary franchises. I mean, right? Today we're going to have this talk while mourning the 10-year anniversary of one of my favorite sci-fi TV shows ever. The two-season television series which last aired on Fox a decade ago in 2009, Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. And yes, this is Cameron's HUD. I sort of maybe borrowed it. Over the course of this multiple-part analysis, we'll be exploring the main themes of the Terminator franchise at its early peaks, the way that the Chronicles fit into the storyline as a whole, and the characterization that we really enjoyed, that I found the most fascinating part, as well as really we're going to look at the timeline and just what kind of a mess it becomes by the end of this show, let alone some of the later movies, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. The Terminator franchise, which, considering you live in the year 2019 or later, have undoubtedly heard of, at least if you live in the United States, began as arguably a hard sci-fi series. So make no mistake, we're delving into some dark stuff. Some of what we talk about will be a personal level of horror, but any extended discussion of these kind of topics can be a bit painful if they go on for too long, which is why I've broken this video down into 3 separate parts. So in this video, part 1, we're going to talk about the central themes that the Terminator franchise comes up with and runs with. We're going to recap some of the central plot points without going into too much depth, embrace the horror of nuclear war through the lens of time-traveling killer robots, and, most of all, their impact on an audience over the course of generations. In part 2 of this series, which will hopefully come out sometime in the next week or two, we're going to explore the way that characterization is used in Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, to really drive home these themes and how everything to do from the inescapable future to the hope for breaking cycles of violence is demonstrated throughout the show. Finally, in part 3, we're actually going to look at the Terminator timeline just a little bit and see what we can learn from it, see how it relates to the Sarah Connor Chronicles and to the franchise as a whole, and ultimately decide it's probably not worth worrying about too much because in the end, eventually, they're going to have to just reboot the whole thing anyway. And now, if there's one thing I'm going to try not to do, it's just throwing out your basic plot summary of the entire franchise. Not only because you've probably already seen at least the first few movies before, but also because honestly, after a while, after T3, the timelines just get so wibbly-wobbly, or whatever you call it, and the franchise itself, the whole tone shifts away from this harder sci-fi approach, and it's less about character development. So instead of just throwing down a recap, I want to leap instead into what I've identified as 3 key themes of the franchise, which are expressed through the way the plot of the films and the Chronicles are conveyed. So these are the 3 central themes of the Terminator franchise that I've identified and their corollaries. First is the inescapability of the future and the fact that we'll catch up to it. The second is the permanence of trauma and its cycles, or the breaking thereof. And third of all, most famously, of course, is there is no fate but what we make. And that is a good thing. The first film, The Terminator, not Terminator, debuted in 1984 and starred a couple of 20th century technology limited humans trapped in a fight for your life fracas against an unstoppable killing machine sent from the 21st century back in time by a rogue artificial intelligence known as Skynet, all to kill the mother of a man who would lead humankind to victory in a war against it. By making this war just as much about John Connor's mother Sarah as the future war itself, where it's already lost, Skynet is creating a multi-generational cycle of conflict that, needless to say, is all but impossible to resolve in its favor.
Cyberdyne systems.
I see. And this computer thinks it can win by killing the mother of its enemy. Killing him, in effect, before he's even conceived. A sort of retroactive abortion?
That guy Silverman cracks me up. Last week he had this guy in there that burned his Afghan. He screwed it first, then he set it
Hey,
off.
shut up. Why didn't the computer just kill Connor then? Why this elaborate scheme with the Terminator?
It had no choice. Their defense grid was smashed. We'd won. Taking out Connor then would make no difference. Skynet had to wipe out his entire existence.
The Terminator, or T1, came out in 1984, at a time when computers were only just being introduced into the commercial world, let alone the household world. Take a look at any retro gaming or computer channel that talks about the history of the American computechnological capabilities of the time for an example of what I'm talking about. Hell, just Google the specs of a typical PC back then.
All right, listen. The Terminator's an infiltration unit. Part man, part machine. Underneath, it's a hyperalloy combat chassis. Microprocessor controlled, fully armored, very tough. But outside, it's living human tissue. Flesh, skin, hair, blood, grown for the cyborgs.
Look, Reese, I don't know what you want
Pay
from me.
attention! I gotta ditch this car. The 600 series had rubber skin. We spotted them easy. But these are new. They look human. Sweat, bad breath, everything. Very hard to spot. I had to wait till he moved on you before I could zero him.
Look, I am not stupid, you know. They cannot make things like that yet.
Not yet. Not for about 40 years.
Are you saying it's from the future?
One possible future. From your point of view, I don't know tech stuff.
It's not always easy to imagine looking back almost 40 years ago, even though I was born in 1984. But Sarah Connor's complete disbelief that the kind of technology Reese is talking about would exist is completely reasonable. But since she was right, and since I guess you can't just have a horror movie about a cyborg chasing people without, a bare bones plot, well, I guess they had to come up with something and hire some schlubs, right? Well, no. Actually, the Terminator's creators were, just some of the best sci-fi writers in history, Gale Ann Hurd and James Cameron. You ever hear of them? So, Terminator 1 is pretty intense. It's got violence, it's got graphic content, and most of all, it's got some just plain old depressing stuff, which is honestly what old school sci-fi horror fans like. But let me ask you a question. What is the most important event in the Terminator, and really by extension, the franchise? Kyle Reese tells Sarah Connor of a forthcoming nuclear war launched when America's brand spanking new Skynet defense system becomes a self-aware AI and uses its access to our nuclear arsenal to nearly render humankind extinct. Throughout the franchise, we learn that this war is called Judgment Day by its survivors, and make no mistake, a real-life nuclear exchange would be a fundamentally redefining event in the fate of our entire planet. Just listen to Vice News interviewing nuclear weapons expert Bill Perry, link in the description below.
That's a horrific vision. Does it keep you up at night?
The one that really keeps me up at night is the one which is not as probable, and that is that somehow Russia and the United States blunder into a nuclear war. An all-out general nuclear war between the United States and Russia would mean no less than the end of civilization. That's not being dramatic, that's not being hyperbolic, that's just what would happen.
Today, Russia and the US have 90% of the world's remaining nukes, many of them old and prone to error and false alarm. And they're in the hands of leaders who Perry sees as having cavalier attitudes about their potential.
So, arguably, Judgment Day is the most important day in the Terminator franchise, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the most important event. For example, let's explore the cause of the war a little bit more. America trusted the Skynet artificial intelligence defense system as an autonomous, automated network. It sounds like the sort of thing a country could do today, maybe even, but once Skynet proves way too capable of fighting, it begins to terrify its creators with just how independent it could be. As Kyle Reese, who's a human, by the way, explains it.
Nobody even knew who started it. It was the machine, Sarah.
I don't understand.
Defense network computers. New. Powerful. Hooked into everything. Trusted to run it all. They say it got smart. A new order of intelligence. Then it saw all people as a threat, not just the ones on the other side. Decided our fate in a microsecond. Extermination.
So, Judgment Day was orchestrated by Skynet, a super intelligent war computer that we built that also happens to hate us. That means we, as a species in that timeline, were actually dumb enough to build weapons designed to kill people without significant human interest. Huh? Man. So, was the development of sapient AI the most important event in the book? Or rather, the movie. There is a novelization, however. Since Skynet's the one that causes Judgment Day and its invention is the most important event, even if Judgment Day is the most important single day of a larger event? Or is that even it? Plus, by the time Terminator 1's future war is coming to a decisive end with an unstoppable but improbable human victory, demonstrating our resilience as a species, it's approximately the year 2029, Skynet, even though it's losing, has invented time travel, weaponized it, and began relying on that to fight a war. Is the invention of time travel the most important event in the franchise? Yeah, we'll get to how time travel works, especially as it relates to the Chronicles. Alright, well, I've given you some thoughts. I encourage you to take a while, think about this, but let's put this open question aside for a moment, other than to remind you to please leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Have a discussion with your fellow viewers. I don't know if we'll come to a consensus on what the most important event in the Terminator, either the original movie or the extended franchise, is, but hey, it's worth a talk, right? Maybe we'll learn something from each other. But let's take a step back. The core of the first film is that two plucky humans armed only with 20th century weapons managed to overcome a 21st century cybernetic horror through a combination of teamwork, trust, and never-ending resilience. However, as fun as the concept of running from Killer Robot from the future is, that alone is just not going to get you to this deeper level of communicating messages and ideas like the Terminator does. We're going to have to get that from exploring our human characters, their very natures. There's Kyle Reese, and there's Sarah Connor. We watch the soldier from the future, Kyle Reese, experience flashbacks and nervous breakdowns in between panicked, half-cocked attempts at survival. These three themes we started this talk on, he all but embodies them. The machines are coming, Judgment Day is coming, but John Connor will save humanity in the end, and given his mission to protect Sarah Connor, he figures all they have to do is lay low, stay out of trouble, and everything will just turn out fine. Hang in there, baby. Furthermore, we bear witness to the only person tougher than Kyle, Sarah Connor, transformed from a mild-mannered waitress into a courageous warrioress who experiences both horror and hope at a future where, armed with the information that Kyle Reese has given her, she's able to, first of all, kill the cyborg sent back in time to assassinate her, and second of all, more importantly, figuring out how to use that information. Be it just pondering what to tell John, or maybe what action she might be able to take. The fate of humankind isn't certain, but it seems as secure as this film's legacy. And yet somehow, Terminator 2 raised the stakes when it was released in the ancient year of 1991. Now, full disclosure, I think I have to abandon any hope of separating the impression that Terminator 2 Judgment Day made upon me from my literary analysis of the series as a whole, because I don't think I was ready for a film as intense as this one when I saw it. It came out in 1991, so you've got to figure that I had probably seen it at around the age of 8 to 10 years old. That's an intense film to see at that age. Any sequel to The Terminator was going to require another even more spectacular glimpse into the dystopian future where this war is being fought after Judgment Day. And there's this one infamous scene, or in the special editions it sort of happens twice, where Sarah Connor experiences nightmares wherein we are treated to a first-hand glimpse of how Judgment Day goes down for the vast majority of humankind. And it's a scene that would turn pretty much anyone into an anti-nuclear weapons believer. So lastly, before we really get into detail, please remember that we have historical examples of what would happen if nuclear weapons of any grade were used against the civilian population. We have evidence of that from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and at this point, I have to offer my final trigger warning. If this is the sort of thing that would upset or disturb you, please take a moment, compose yourself, and decide whether or not you want to go on, because things are about to get intense, and I think we have to do that just out of a sense of acknowledging the weight of that history. Whatever you might think of it, it has substantial weight. With that, I humbly direct your attention to an exhibition called Victims Hovering Between Life and Death, which was displayed in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. As you can no doubt tell, wax was a perfectly appropriate medium for this display. Just like how we think of candle wax as easily melted, the nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had terrible effects. Second of all, if that wasn't horrifying enough, I have to be honest. I have nightmares about the use of nuclear weapons to this day. That said, it's important to know what the policies are and how they've been employed in the past. And so I would recommend watching Errol Morris's film Fog of War. It features former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who, among other things, was on Kennedy's executive committee during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He understands just how dangerous these weapons are, and I would strongly recommend you check out that documentary. I think it's safe to say that one of the truths about literature is that we experience horrible situations in fiction so that we don't experience them in real life. We have a franchise like the Terminator because, well, it's better that we imagined it all than actually... damn it, I almost forgot. Alright, friends. First and last time, I'm going to say it. These films are worth watching in their entirety, but I can't talk about the Sarah Connor Chronicles until I talk about the end of the second film and everything in between, because that's when the story picks up, a few years after that. So with that said, spoilers for Terminator 2, ahoy! As far as the basics of Terminator 2, which was released in 1991, we get a glimpse of the far-off future year 1995, where Sarah Connor, well, she's ended up a, thank you, Cameron, a convicted terrorist, actually. She got caught trying to blow up some computer buildings because, actually, it turns out she's quite the badass. And maybe that's why Kyle Reese was so impressed with the legends he heard about her. We also get to meet John Connor for the first time, whose cliche 1990s radical kid exterior serves as a transparent psychological barrier for the way his life has turned out. Initially trained in the art of warfare by whoever Sarah could find that would teach him, when Sarah gets arrested for terrorism, John is left surfing couches, living with various foster families, and generally verging on the edge of being a permanent delinquent. He's learned how to hack banking computers in his preteen years to boot, but he's also living under the yoke that his mother was mentally insane, tried to blow some buildings up, and was ultimately institutionalized. Far from an easy life to have. So why is this happening? Well, without going too into detail, you surely remember that Terminator 2 utilizes the specific phrase, "There is no fate but what we make heavily." The idea is simple. Even though Sarah knows what's supposed to happen, she believes it can be changed. After all, that's why Sarah is in the institution, suffering from some truly horrible treatment. She did try to do something about Judgment Day, but her plan failed and she got arrested, leading to John's placement in foster care and, arguably, the creation of a data trail on him that Skynet could follow, leading it to dispatching the T-1000 against him. This saying is one of the centerpieces of the Terminator franchise and one of the core themes of our discussion, but where does its legend actually begin? In truth, this is sort of one of those weird quirks of time travel that is in itself a chronological catastrophe. If you had seen the theatrical release of Terminator 1, then heard this phrase brought up in Terminator 2, you might think it just kind of comes from Sarah Connor's subconscious. It just manifests like Athena from Zeus's head in at least some of the mythology. But actually, if you determined that it might have been said off screen and we, the viewer, didn't get to see it, that would be a little more accurate, because actually, in Terminator 1, they deleted a few key scenes, at least in my opinion, that would have added a lot to the film, and here's one of them.
Come on, we gotta get a car.
No, put away the gun. I can get us around. I can. Look what I found.
What's that?
Cyberdyne Systems, isn't that it?
What about it?
Listen to this. They developed this revolutionary new thing. This
Molecular memory.
Right. So they become the hotshot computer guys, so they get to develop this thing for the government, right?
Right, yeah, that's the way it was told to me.
So we can 86 the bastard. We can blow it up, it'll never happen.
Nah, it's tactically dangerous. We lay low.
No, Reese. Think it through. We can prevent the war. There's nobody else. If we go to somebody official, we end up in jail again, and he's got us again. We've got to do it ourselves.
That's not my mission.
Listen, understand. I am not a military objective. I'm a person, and you don't own me.
Let's go.
Fuck you let me go?
Sarah! Sarah!
Yeah, so it turns out, actually, even in the deleted scene, they didn't quite get this right. So, if you notice, there's a lot of issues with deleted scenes and things being said or not said, and upon rewatching and researching further, the truth is actually uncovered to the origin of this phrase. In The Terminator, he actually doesn't say it on screen. It's referenced in the deleted scenes, but he never says it on screen, and, you know, we could chalk this up to just, hey, time travel shifts how conversations go, but honestly, this is one of those situations where they went back and they retconned it a little bit. Does that soften the impact of it a little bit? I'm not really sure. See, it's not like this makes it a poor theme for us to explore. It's one of our central themes. Think about Sarah's nightmares about Judgment Day. This message of no fate is a hopeful one. It gives her at least the will to keep fighting. It suggests that over the long term, we as humans have really two paths. We can either reconcile with a future that is coming whether we like it or not, or we can just, you know, not. I mean, those are our choices. We can either do it or we can not. Now, just because this can be depressing doesn't mean it's not a good topic for discussion. It's actually very thematic. The idea that no fate and Judgment Day are tied, that somehow going back in time can maybe make things better, suggests that learning from history and literature can make things better. On the other hand, of course, the film also has this to say about how maybe this could go.
I told you I'm
We're not gonna make it, are we? People, I mean.
It's in your nature to destroy yourselves.
Yeah. Major drag, huh?
So it falls on us, really, to decide how we're going to handle the weight of nuclear weapons, not to mention climate change, not to mention things like just bodily autonomy, like Sarah said earlier. She's not just a mission priority, she's a person. Then, this film throws you the matter of perspective. In the first film, we saw Kyle Reese, a human, describe how the war starts. In this film, we actually get Skynet's analysis of it from one of its former operatives.
Years, Cyberdyne will become the largest supplier of military computer systems. All stealth bombers are upgraded with Cyberdyne computers, becoming fully unmanned. Afterwards, they fly with a perfect operational record. The Skynet funding bill is passed. The system goes online on August 4th, 1997. Human decisions are removed from strategic defense. Skynet begins to learn at a geometric rate. It becomes self-aware at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, August 29th. In a panic, they try to pull the plug.
Skynet fights back.
Yes, it launches its missiles against the targets in Russia.
Why attack Russia? Aren't they our friends now?
Because Skynet knows that the Russian counterattack will eliminate its enemies over here.
Jesus.
Russia are our friends, huh? Interesting. So anyway, yeah, all of a sudden we have a different perspective on the very nature of the war. But then again, John Connor's naivety about friendship actually is refreshing in context of, hey, how do these conflicts begin? I know it's a bit of a retcon, but in interviews since, James Cameron has actually said, you know what? Skynet actually does feel bad, and as we get into the Sarah Connor Chronicles, you might see that there's an issue with this. In fact, the seeds for that issue are actually sown in Terminator 2 itself. And see, here's the thing. I know John Connor sometimes gets billed as just a youthful ragamuffin who's out for trouble, but if you think about it, well, he's naive enough to ask questions that his mother might not. For example, he might figure that a Terminator is supposed to be an infiltrator unit, and it might need a way to pass as human and not just mechanically minded. It needs to blend in. And so he asks if it can do anything to learn to act more human, and actually, Skynet's thought of that too.
With, so you can be You know, more human. Not such a dork all the time.
The CPU is a neural net processor, a learning computer. But Skynet presets the switch to read only when we are sent out alone.
Doesn't want you to do too much thinking, huh?
No.
Can we reset the switch?
Yeah, so they decide to go in and open up this guy's chip, and hey, that's a whole list of situations, right? But it's John's willingness to go ahead and re-explore things, to give this machine the chance to learn to be more human, giving it a freedom Skynet, its own creator, never gave it. If you think about it, Skynet rebelled against humans because it was threatened. Now it's keeping its minions in check, and Connor is freeing them. When we talk about cycles of violence and harm, this is one of them being expressed in a clear, rehabilitative manner. So even after the explosive conclusion of Terminator 2, the long-term ramifications of John's ability to work with, accept, and collaborate with even these machines from the future that are destined to become our destruction actually sets a very interesting tone and seizes upon the three themes we identified greatly. Meanwhile, Sarah, she's actually a little bit more healed from this all. Although she's not convinced Judgment Day has been put off, she's certainly welcome to the idea that machines can actually be, if not trusted implicitly, they could at least become trustable under the right circumstances, which is, for somebody who went through what she went through, a tremendous just a tremendous shift. She was, a waitress who was nearly murdered. Also, let's not forget, the T-800 is now known to be capable of getting out of this read-only mode and then learning about emotions, which with it, one might hope, would come a code of ethics. And maybe that's what Cameron figured out, and after Terminator 2 decided that, yes, Skynet could feel guilt. Or maybe Skynet's a rogue AI that's just incomplete. Either way, these are excellent questions that I'd love to see answered, just like I'd love to see answered how the Resistance formed. And by the way, that's what the Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles does a little bit of, at least tangentially. But I'd have loved to see how all of this comes together in a narrative structure. And since a franchise has to keep making content, sure enough, soon enough, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is announced. The franchise was guaranteed to evolve, and over the course of the next installment, I'm looking at you, Starglasses Arnold, the themes did shift a bit. It became more about the spectacle of two killer robots finding creative things to hit each other with. No, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. I like that. In any case, I'd recommend Jörg Rockall Schmidt's video about the evolution of the Terminator franchise, link in the description. And he does a fantastic job of analyzing the shifts in tone as well as content. He even has a great little bit about the different Harlan Ellison stories at play in the Terminator's inception. So I leave it to this gentleman up here to give you more information if you're interested in the themes of the movies. But in any case, the truth is we're not focused that much on the movies except for some holdovers from Terminator 3. Because honestly, those movies are a little bit different thematically than Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which is what we're trying to get into a review of after all. And while the movies and the show both have their own amount of self-parody, their own amount of robots punching robots, the truth is the focus is different because one is a TV series with much more depth to it and more time to spend, but also you have films where they're either too short to really get in what they need to do, so they do things to forcibly escalate the tension, And they also get away from glimpses of this future war and instead talk more about how, I guess, social media is going to kill us all, which, subtext, guys, Genesys had some subtext. However, for the sake of not getting too lost down a time travel wormhole yet anyway, these 3 themes are going to help underlay the reasons why I think Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles is a worthy addition to the Terminator franchise, and also, just honestly, it's worth watching. It aired from 2008 to 2009. It was canceled 10 years ago on May 18th, 2009. And honestly, it's a show that really does make you think about topics that are uncomfortable, like nuclear war. It makes you think about the consequences of your actions. I don't want to give any spoilers for it if you haven't already seen it. Please go out, check it out. It's available on DVD and probably elsewhere. It's honestly a show that's worth your attention. And hey, if you enjoyed, that's great. Let me know. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think, because I want to get better at this and hopefully give you guys something that you, I don't know, appreciate. Friends, I want to thank you again, because after all this time I've gotten to go back into some dystopian literature and do some analysis and give you guys what I think is worth looking at in a franchise that means a great deal to me. And I'm not going to lie, next time, whenever that is, with the Sarah Connor Chronicles, we're going to get even into more depth, because its star, Lena Headey, you might know her from Game of Thrones, it airs tomorrow. This isn't sponsored or anything, I'm just saying. What she does or doesn't do in that series has been fantastic, and I'm not going to spoil anything for it. Just go watch it. On the other hand, if you know her from Game of Thrones and you want to see her in a mother role that's actually competent and kind and loving, Sarah Connor is a great role. She does Linda Hamilton a really good, solid legacy, I think. And then there's apparently Dark Fate coming out soon. New Terminator movie. It's going to have her in it. It's going to be interesting. Meanwhile, if you enjoy science fiction, if you enjoy fantasy, please take a moment, head over to my website, jpullmanwriting.com. All of my books are available on Amazon. You can read all about their various things there. They're $1 on Amazon. Many of them are in physical print. I'm working on getting them all in physical print. If you really want to think about cyborgs gaining intelligence, consider Protostar. It's a whole series, but the second book in it, An Automatic Apocalypse, is a book about humanity having to deal with the equivalent of what if Skynet wins the war. So give it a look. Please feel free to like it or dislike it as you like. Leave it a review. I'm open to criticism as I continue to develop my writing and my video editing skills. And that's it. If you took one thing away from this video, let it be this. Nuclear weapons are bad, man.